Please allow me to introduce our next speaker, Admiral Bill McRaven. Admiral McRaven is a retired U.S. Navy four-star admiral and the former chancellor of the University of Texas system. During his time in the military, he commanded Special Operations Force at every level, eventually taking charge of the U.S. Special Operations Command. He currently serves as a senior advisor for Lazard Financial Advisory, and he is on the boards of the Council on Foreign Relations, the National Football Foundation, the International Crisis Group, the Mission Continues, and the ConocoPhillips. Admiral McRaven is joined by Alexandr Wang, CEO and founder at Scale. And now, over to Alex.
Admiral McRaven, it's a real honor to be speaking with you today. I think it's fair to say that most of our audience members are familiar with you and your work in your command of the operation to bring Osama bin Laden to justice and your many years of service in special operations and the Navy SEAL. So first, I would just like to say thank you so much for your service.
Hey, thanks, Alex. It's great to be with you today.
And I'm very excited to speak with you. I think serving our nation is one of the most important and valuable missions that exists out there, frankly. But maybe to start out with, what sort of led you and guided you towards a life and sort of career in serving our nation?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I was raised in a military family. So my father was a World War II fighter pilot. He had actually played professional football before joining then the Army Air Corps in 1941. So he served 2 years in the European theater during World War II, and then fought a little bit of time in Korea, and then had a long career in the Air Force. So I was kind of raised around the men and women that were part of the greatest generation. And the thing that really stood out to me about these incredible men and women, and you think that most of them were born in the early 20th century. They went through the Great Depression. They went through World War I with their parents, and then the men all went off to World War II. They come back from World War II and they build this incrediof nation. And they just had these values, and a lot of these values, I think, they learned from their time in the military. This idea of ensuring that you are taking care of the men and women around you, the sense of honesty and integrity and commitment and duty. And so I kind of grew up amongst those men and women. They weren't all perfect, don't misunderstand me. Like all of us, they had their flaws, but fundamentally, they represented the values that we think about when we think about America. And so I kind of wanted to be part of that. I wanted to be part of the camaraderie that I saw among my dad and his fellow pilots, and frankly, amongst my mother and the friends that she had raised. So that's really what kind of encouraged me to go into the military in the first place.
Yeah, and in your a huge chunk of your time in the military was spent in special operations, and our special operators are a very select group of men and women. They're all screened and selected because they possess skills and attributes that are extraordinary in some capacity and have a great capability to sort of serve our nation. And you had a not only being a part of that community, but you also had a very prominent leadership role over time within that community. One of the questions I have is, and this is sort of a very general question, but what were some of the things that you learned about leading groups of people who are all incredibly talented and special in their own regards, and enabling them to sort of accomplish their potential?
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story. When I was the executive officer at SEAL Team 1, so an executive officer is essentially the number 2 guy at the SEAL team, and this was probably about 1988, 89. And my job as the executive officer was to select and build the SEAL platoons. So each SEAL team had about 8 to 10 SEAL platoons. And it was a little bit like an NFL draft. I had all their resumes, all their biographies, and then I would decide I would pick 2 officers and 12 enlisted guys to be part of a SEAL platoon. So I decided that I was going to pick and build the perfect SEAL platoon, the super platoon. So I went through all of the resumes, and I picked one of the officers who was a Naval Academy graduate, a Rhodes Scholar. The number 2 officer was also an Academy graduate, wickedly bright. The chief petty officer, the senior enlisted guy, was a Vietnam vet. The leading petty officer, the number 2 enlisted guy, was also a Vietnam vet, which was a little interesting back in those days. And then I kind of handpicked each of the enlisted guys. And then I began to build the rest of the SEAL platoons. And then I kind of got down to the last group of guys, kind of like the Bad News Bears. It was the officers that, okay, maybe they weren't the most stellar in the group, and the enlisted guys had a little bit of a reputation. But I put that platoon together. And an interesting thing happened. The super platoon, the most talented platoon I had on paper, turned out to be one of the worst SEAL platoons I've ever seen. And the last platoon, the Bad News Bears, one, they had a little chip on their shoulder. They understood how the process worked. They knew that they were kind of the last guys to get picked. They had a chip on their shoulder, but they came together as a team in a way, frankly, that none of the other platoons did. And they turned out to be one of the best SEAL platoons I've ever worked with. So I always tell folks, look, if you have to choose between talent and chemistry, I'll take chemistry every time. I don't know that it applies to the tech community, but I will tell you, if you can take, talented people, if you can get talent and chemistry, if you get the Golden State Warriors, then good on you. But the fact of the matter is, chemistry sometimes allows people to be their very best because they come together as a team. They have a mission that they're focused on. They put their egos aside, which was one of the problems with this super platoon. They were all very talented. They all wanted to be the big dog on the porch, and they just didn't come together as a platoon in the way that I had hoped. Now, they ended up being a good platoon, but frankly, they were not as good as the less talented platoon that came together and built a team. So I learned in my career, look, I'm going to take chemistry over talent every time, but obviously what you're searching for is those incredibly talented men and women that can, in fact, come together as a team. And that's part of your job as a leader, is to help them build that team.
Building on this theme of leadership, I think in addition to obviously, it is a very interesting point that you bring up around leading these groups of very talented men and women and getting them to work well together, getting them to sort of to have chemistry and actually accomplish great things as a unit. A huge part of your role must have been managing through great change, great periods of uncertainty, incredibly difficult missions, moments where it was probably very hard to know what was going to happen. And what did you learn about being able to lead through basically uncertainty, hardship, risk, and being able to guide a team of people through very precarious circumstances to success?
Yeah, well, in the military, we have a term called servant leadership. And it's different than when I first came into the military. So I came into the Navy when I was a midshipman at the University of Texas in 1973. I got commissioned in 1977. And candidly, in 1977, the commanding officers of ships were pretty draconian in how they dealt with the junior officers. I mean, it was essentially their way or the highway. They were, as we kind of said back then, they were screamers. And the idea was, if you came on the bridge of a ship, if you were a young officer, they put as much pressure on you as possible to find out whether or not you could withstand that pressure. And if you could come out of the crucible on the other end, having survived, then you were probably going to be good enough to be a naval officer. But we found as we built the all-volunteer military, that just didn't work. I mean, kind of yelling and screaming and really kind of pressurizing the group that worked with you did not always get you the best and brightest talent that you were looking for. So this concept of servant leadership, which of course has been around for millennia, but we really began to incorporate it in the military, was this idea that, look, as a leader, my job is to make you better. My job is to help the team come together. My job is to give you the training, give you the resources, give you the latitude to do the job, but also to hold you accountable when you fail to do the job. You don't have to be a jerk about it, but you have to make sure you're going to set high standards, and then you're going to give the team the tools to achieve those standards. So this idea of servant leadership of recognizing that it isn't about me. If it's about, your promotion and your glory, you're probably not the right leader for the job. If it's about making the team come together and work, then you're just going to find that they're a lot more receptive to being led, to being managed, particularly in times of crisis. Now, the other aspect of this is you always have to ensure as a leader that the team understands what the mission is, that they buy into the mission, that they understand that the mission is a noble or an honorable one. And frankly, building technology is an honorable mission. Finance is an honorable mission. This isn't just about being in the military and serving your country. I mean, the fact of the matter is the work you and your fellow technical folks do within the business is very honorable. It is very noble work, and the world needs the sort of things that you are developing. So you convince them, you show them what the mission is. Again, you convince them that this is worthwhile, and then you have to inspire them and manage them and motivate them. And every once in a while, you got to give them a little tough love to kind of keep them moving in the right direction. So it's about servant leadership. It's about making sure that the individuals on the team understand what the mission is and why the mission is important. And that really is kind of your responsibility as a leader, is again, shaping the narrative so they understand these things. And then when it comes to risk, one of the things I always found whenever I had a hard problem was someone had probably dealt with that problem before. So you wanted to find the person that had experience. I've often said that nothing really trumps experience, certainly not in the military. You may have the best academics, you may have had the soldiers that trained their whole career, but I will take the individual man or woman that's been in a tough situation before, generally in a very similar situation, bring them in and say, okay, how did you deal with this problem when you were in the middle of it? Not how do the academics deal with it, not, you can't see behind me, but I've got a library of thousands of books, not how it's written down in the books. How did you deal with this problem? That's the understanding I need to know. That helps me kind of reduce the risk. And every manager is going to be dealing with risk. The job is to reduce the risk to a manageable level. There's always risk. You've got to do everything you can to simplify the mission, to make sure the team has the right resources, to make sure they have the right leaders, and that will begin to buy down the risk until then you can manage it.
100%. I want to pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about sort of, what this nation kind of means to you. I think you clearly, I imagine there's some incredible moments throughout your career, but one of them probably most momentously is bringing Osama bin Laden to justice, and sort of, it must have been this just incredible moment of serving and defending, our country, serving, defending America, and I think these special moments probably clarify a lot of what it means to serve our nation. But maybe I would love to just hear in your own words, what does America mean to you, and why is it important to defend?
I want to kind of walk you through, Alex. I'll get to your question, but I want to walk you through what I've always considered kind of the stages of service to, in this case, to the country. Because, I will tell you, when I came into the military at the age of 21, and when I was commissioned, this wasn't about, frankly, the broader ideal of America. Yeah, I was a 21-year-old guy. I wanted to be challenged. I wanted to go to SEAL training. I wanted to go to the toughest military training I could to find out whether or not I was worthwhile, right? And I think that's true of a lot of men and women that join the military. They want to go to Marine Corps boot camp, or they want to go to Army Ranger School, or they want to fly airplanes in a difficult environment. And so initially you come into the military with this idea that I want to be challenged with something. And that's kind of, as I've said before, a little bit of kind of phase one. The second level really is, then it becomes an adventure. So after I got through SEAL training, now I'm traveling all around the world. I'm jumping out of airplanes. I'm locking out of submarines. I'm traveling the world. It was this great adventure. And then at some point in my career, at about the 15-year point, it really became a profession. I realized I was a member of the profession of arms. I was in charge of men and women. My job was to be professional, to know everything there was to know about weapon systems and demolition and tactics and operations and strategy. I had needed to read Clausewitz and Jomini and Liddell Hart. I wanted to be a professional. But then, after 9/11, it became a calling. And a calling is a whole another level of kind of personal engagement. And what I found was interesting was, for me, that calling probably didn't come until about the 26-year point, right, in my career. But I watched the young men and women that signed up after 9/11. And these young men and women, knew they were signing up to go to war. And so for them, this idea was, it wasn't just about the challenge and the adventure and being a professional. My 26 years for these guys, all of a sudden, it was a calling immediately, because they were in Iraq and Afghanistan. They saw their fellow soldiers, being killed or being wounded, and they understood that they were fighting for the nation. And, none of us are naive to the nation's flaws. I mean, we all understand that, but we also understand the goodness of what this nation brings. We understand the values that the founding fathers brought to us, this idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, this idea that we are all created equal. And we haven't always lived up to those ideals, but those ideals underpin everything we are as a nation. And when you join the military, you go through, in my case, ROTC, and you learn about the great warriors and the great battles, but you also learn about, again, the traits and the qualities that made America what it is today. And again, we don't brainwash these young men and women coming in. We tell them the truth. Yes, we have problems. Yes, not every great man and woman that we hold up and put on statues were really, truly good underneath it. But we also recognize that in order to move forward as a nation, we need to continue to hold and uphold those values. And that's part of our responsibility in the military.
Very eloquently said, and I think the sort of the calling of protecting our nation, it feels very visceral, especially after 9/11. Who are some of the most inspirational men and women that you had the opportunity to get to know and work with in your time in service?
Yeah, I'm asked that question a lot, and I think people always think that I'm going to talk about the great generals and the great admirals and the presidents, and they, frankly, we did have some great generals and admirals, and I was very honored to have the opportunity to work in President George W. Bush's White House, and also obviously a lot with President Obama. So I admire greatly both of those presidents, and I admire and respect all the generals and the admirals that I served with. But I will tell you, the inspiration I got every single day was from the young soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, State Department civilians, intelligence community folks that were doing the hard work. They weren't getting the glory. They were doing the hard work for all the right reasons. And I would watch these young soldiers, going to combat every night primarily to take care of their buddy, the man or woman on their left or their right. They were so committed to both, the nation, their obligation to the nation, but their obligation to their fellow soldier. You couldn't help but be inspired. And when they were wounded, I would go visit them in the hospital, and they never complained. They never said, "Why me?" They never questioned the nature of why they were there. The first thing they always asked me when I went to visit them in the hospital is, "How soon can I get back to my unit? How soon can I get back with my brothers and sisters in this war?" That is a remarkable trait, and that is, frankly, the most inspiring quality I saw in my 37 years in the military, were the young troopers doing the nation's bidding, knowing that they were never going to get the accolades of the admirals and the generals and the presidents, but doing it anyway. That's incredible service.
Yeah, I mean that's really, really moving, and I think a great testament to the brave men and women who serve our nation. What would you say to folks who, partially due to personal reasons and part of their values and whatnot, have a real discomfort on working on and working towards these problems in defense and national security? What would you tell them as somebody who has devoted your life to these very problems?
Yeah, well, first I would tell them that I understand. I understand their concerns. I understand their anguish, and I will try to do the best I can to kind of put a little bit of why we do what we do and why we need their support in context. So after the end of Vietnam, of course, there was this, huge upheaval in the country. The Vietnam War protesters and those that really didn't support the war and didn't support the troops. And the young men predominantly that came back from Vietnam, some of them were spit on, some of them were harassed, and it was very difficult for them. During Desert Shield and Desert Storm, an interesting thing happened. And I don't know the exact genesis of it, but some mother somewhere created a bumper sticker. And the bumper sticker said, "I support the troops. I support the troops." And she probably didn't realize it at the time, but it fundamentally changed the nation's thinking about the men and women that went off to war. She didn't say on that bumper sticker that I support the war in Iraq. She didn't say that I support all war. She didn't say that I support the politics. What she said was I support the troops. And as men and women in the military, our job is to support the commander-in-chief, the commander-in-chief that was duly elected by the people of this country. You can always debate the politics. You can debate the reasons to go to war. And I think that's all fair game. And it should be debated. And people should question why we're going to war. And they should question whether or not we are doing the right things. But the men and women that serve, we serve, really at the request of the commander-in-chief. And a lot of that requires us to have the technology that can be precise, the technology that can put a missile through a window that only kills the bad guy in that little space and doesn't hurt the women and children that are outside. The technology that allows us to see the enemy before they see us so my men don't get ambushed. The technology that allows us to communicate, to connect command and control so that we can maneuver to a place where the civilians are not and where we can engage the enemy without as many civilian casualties. War is not easy. War is brutal. But you have to be able to kill the enemy to stop them from hurting the civilians on the ground or from hurting your fellow soldiers. And as a commander, you have an obligation to protect the men and women around you. And you want the best technology available for them so they can do the nation's bidding. Now, if the nation doesn't want to go to war, that's the nation's call. But once the decision is made to go to war, to go to conflict, it's not the troops' decision. The troops don't decide to go to war. The civilian elected leaders are the ones that make that decision. But once we go, we are going to do the very best we can to win that war, to fight the fights, to protect the men and women around us. And that's why we need the technology. You can still support the troops without agreeing to support the war, without agreeing about why we went to war. You should have those discussions. You should have those debates. You should have those arguments. But be prepared to support the young men and women that are going out there trying to do the best because they signed up and volunteered to protect the nation.
And I think, that was very clear. Thank you so much for walking through that. And I think it's especially given what you had said earlier about, the true character of the men and women who serve our nation, this quality that you mentioned around, in the hospital asking, when can they start serving again? I mean, that's so powerful. That is just, and it's so commendable. And I think, I personally believe it.
The other thing, Alex, that I'll touch on here, when people can be divorced from the soldiers, if you are at an elite institution, an elite private institution, or if you're at some place where you don't see the soldiers, then it is easy to distance yourself from them. When you spend time with them and you see that these are great young men and women, that, oh, by the way, they're probably the guys and gals that you went to high school with, that you went to college with, that you just didn't know joined the military. They are the children of people from all across the country. So they should not be viewed as, someone that you don't know. You do know them. Maybe you've never actually encountered them, but you know them. They are the people in your community that are just trying to do the best they can to protect the country.
100%. I mean, we're very lucky at scale I'm very lucky to work with many veterans, many of which served in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they are some of the most incredible people I have the honor to work with. They are brilliant. They work hard. They care about the mission, and they they understand more than I ever can the sort of what's at stake and the criticality of the technology that we work on. I wanted to ask you. Obviously, right now we're in a period of heightened geopolitical uncertainty. There's the war between Russia and Ukraine. What do you think this means for the next 5 to 10 years? And are you concerned that there's sort of there's potential for greater and greater conflict?
Yeah, I would say it's actually more than the next 5 or 10 years. I really think this is an existential fight. It is playing out, on the battlegrounds in Ukraine. But make no mistake about it, this is about Western influence, global influence for the next 100 years. This is about whether people believe in democracy and representative governments. This is about whether people believe in free trade. This is about whether or not people believe in the values that we bring. If Putin wins this war, however that is defined, and the Ukrainians lose it after all the effort we're putting into it, then people around the world will question whether or not it is worth being aligned with Western governments. They will question whether or not the American system and the European system and those of our other allies are worth being part of. You see this rise of autocrats in the world. Of course, not just the Communist Party in China, but you see it in Latin America. You see it now in parts of Europe. And people are beginning to question whether or not all the things that we've stood for over the years are truly worthwhile. So if the world loses American influence, then who will they align with? Will they align with Russia? Will they align with China? Do you think that China is all about free speech and freedom of expression? Do you think that Putin would put up with people that disagree with him? Do you believe that they think that rules are important? No, of course not. And so if the West isn't influencing the future, then Russia and China will, if Russia wins. So I'm a believer that we need to do everything we possibly can to help the Ukrainians win this fight. And I'm obviously pleased to see that they are making good progress. The war still has a long way to go. Obviously, Putin has done a partial mobilization of 300,000 Russians. I don't think that's fundamentally going to change the battlefield till probably the spring. You've got to bring these young men in. You've got to train them. You've got to get them out on the battlefield. They've got to get integrated into the unit. That's always challenging to do. But come spring, the battlefield could be a little bit more dicey for the Ukrainians. You've also heard that the Russians are doing a referendum in Luhansk and Donetsk, and I can't think a couple of the other oblasts that are there. And of course, they will agree that they want to be part of Russia because it's a rigged referendum. And so now, Putin will be in the position to say, well, this is now part of Russia. We're going to annex it after the referendum. And then the fact that the Ukrainians are attacking Donetsk and Luhansk and Zaporizhia will be, a breach of Russian sovereign territory that plays into his narrative. The hard part about the Ukrainian war right now, and the dilemma we have, is the better the Ukrainians do, the more dangerous it gets. Because as Putin's army begins to crumble a little bit, what will he do? Will he, in fact, launch a tactical nuclear weapon? I think the chances of that are low, but they are not zero. They're probably not even 0+1. So, we shouldn't kid ourselves that this is a real possibility. And if he launches a tactical nuclear weapon, what does that do to the NATO alliance? Do they decide that they're going to come in? And if that happens, does it put us in a situation where now we're off on a major global war? So this is a very, very important geopolitical situation we're in right now, and I think everybody needs to get behind Ukraine and recognize, however, that in doing that, we can't be naive to the fact that Russia presents some very, very serious implications if things go south for Putin.
And I think you framed it up perfectly, which is this is a war about Western influence. I think that you're exactly right. I think that the risks are that this sets the tone for the future of geopolitics, which is that it's not about American influence and freedom of speech and freedom of expression. It becomes sort of this mixed, this tricky battle in the world around ideologies, and I think it's really concerning. And I think that I thank you for making that so clear. You were on the.
Well, of course, it's not the ideology to me. I'm sorry. I was going to say the ideology to me is the central issue here. But of course, you also have to think about, between Russia and Ukraine, you have 30% of the world's caloric intake, the wheat, the potash for fertilizer, obviously the whole energy situation. So there's nothing about this that is simple. And we've got to do the best we can to help the Ukrainians. But thank you. I'll go back to you, Alex.
No, I know it's a monumental challenge, and one that I would encourage as many folks in the audience as possible to sort of rise to the occasion for. You chaired a review at the Council on Foreign Relations on innovation and national security related to keeping our edge against competitors. Obviously, very relevant given what we were just discussing, which is that we're potentially entering an era where, of great power competition, where competition is frankly just significantly more important and more critical. What are the things that, as part of that, you identified as the key things that as a nation we need to be doing to maintain and stay ahead in a competitive sense, both from a military and economic standpoint?
Yeah, when we did we pulled the task force together, and we had some of the brightest minds in the country taking a look at the technology and national security issues. We tried not to make it all about China, but frankly, it kind of gravitated in that direction. The good news was, as we took a look at it, yes, the Chinese were closing the gap, but we still felt that we were probably 10 years ahead of the Chinese in terms of technology and the capability that we have, both in AI and machine learning, quantum computing. Again, they're closing that gap quickly, but we still have a sizable lead on it. Having said that, as you well know, the Chinese produce more PhDs, more STEM people, more STEM graduates than any other country. The issue for us, as we looked at it, was a couple things. One, that it is a part of the kind of secret sauce of being in the United States and being part of the Western alliance is that we really do give our researchers, our scientists, our technicians, our technologists the opportunity to be free thinkers, to really experiment, to try, to fail, to just go off on the kind of the craziest ideas, because it is the nature of who we are, certainly as Americans. You don't see that sense of creativity in China. Now, that's not to say they haven't produced some great technology. A lot of this technology has come from the theft of intellectual property. And of course, they do have some great minds, make no mistake about it. But as a whole, what we found was just the nature of what's happening in Silicon Valley and Harvard and actually down here in Austin, Texas, is that the creativity that is kind of part of the American spirit, part of the Western spirit, is something the Chinese are having difficulty simulating and replicating. So the creativity and the freedom to think about things is part and parcel to why we continue to have an edge. Now, what we determined was the government absolutely needs to invest in a number of things. We need to invest in STEM programs. We need to invest in basic science. As you know, the fact of the matter is a lot of companies out there, a lot of tech companies, they will be investing they will be putting their R&D in things that they think are going to be able to, they're going to be able to get some revenue from. But the basic science is where we've been falling down here in the last several decades. I'm pleased to see the Congress put forth a package of a couple $100 million towards basic science. That is good. We also have to begin to teach our young children in the K through 12 arena. We've got to start them early on everything from math and science and reading. You probably saw the recent statistics. We are barely holding our own in math, and we are falling down on reading. What I know from my time as the chancellor at the University of Texas is that if a student isn't at grade level, reading at grade level by the time they're in fourth grade, their chances of getting into college are highly, highly diminished. So we've got to make sure that we are investing in our our young men and women that are going to everything, again, from kindergarten through high school, because they're really the future. If we don't invest in them now, we won't have the kids to do the coding, to do the technology, if we're not prepared to invest. Again, the good news is we have this spirit of creativity, of innovativeness, of entrepreneurship. That is, it may not be unique, but I think per capita, it's higher than a lot of other countries. Now we just need to have to double down on our, again, on the work we're doing in terms of financing the basic science of the education that's going to be needed for the future.
Totally. And how do you think about bridging this gap between kind of, as you mentioned, we have so much innovation, a lot of it happens in the private sector, and we talked a little bit about how critical it is that we actually are able to utilize this technology in our national security efforts as a nation. How do you think about bridging this gap where, objectively there is a gap today between the best and brightest private technology companies, the best and brightest private technologists, and the sort of application towards our national security. What are your thoughts in bringing these two worlds together?
Yeah, I would say that the onus is upon the military to bridge that gap. The tech world, actually, I mean, there have been obviously some high-profile cases where the tech world didn't want to work with the Department of Defense. But I would offer in general that's not the case, because I think once they sit down with us and realize that we're actually pretty decent guys and gals and we're trying to do the nation's bidding, that they join us. The problem is the military system right now is pretty onerous. It is onerous for a whole lot of reasons. I mean, if you're building a fighter jet or a submarine or a ship where there is a man or woman in the loop, you go through some very, very stringent requirements in order to ensure the safety and security of that individual. Where, unfortunately, that process has been, kind of overlaid on top of the software process, which is entirely incorrect. We need to get to the point where we can iterate quickly, where we can bring software in, we find out whether it works. If it doesn't work, we toss it and we get the next level of software. At the end of the day, I've told a lot of clients I've talked to, a lot of companies I've talked to, that the platform of the future will be to some degree agnostic. It won't be about whether or not you've got an F-35 or an F-22 or whatever the next version is. It will be about the software and the technology that is in that aircraft that can do command and control with other aircraft, that can pinpoint the target, that can have some level of artificial intelligence to help the guys back that may be controlling the drop to think about the decisions they're having to make. So the platform is important, don't misunderstand me, but it's more important to have the software and the technology that can be plug and play on the platform. But this really requires the Department of Defense to be more agile, to not be afraid of kind of failing fast. The hard part, of course, is these are taxpayer dollars. So when you have a program and you go to Congress and you say, look, I'm going to spend $1 billion on this program, it may not work. Congress is like, I don't think so. You're going to have to prove to me that whatever program you are developing has got a high level. We've got a high level of confidence that it's going to work, or Congress isn't going to fund it. And then, of course, from a platform standpoint and to some degree a technology standpoint, you run into the problem that certain congressmen, certain senators want those capabilities built in their district. It's part of the American system. It's not necessarily bad, but sometimes it constrains whether or not you're getting the best product for your dollar. But that requires, once again, the military to come forward and to kind of hold their ground and to say, this is the software or this is the technology that we need to ensure that the very best capability is put out on the battlefield to help our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines. So I would offer that the tech world has actually been very forthcoming, at least in my experience. They have been happy to partner with the military in areas that are relevant. The military is equally happy to partner back. It's just that, again, our process are to some degree very bureaucratic, very slow moving. And by the time we finally get a product built, guess what? The tech world has moved 5 iterations past that, and now we got to start all over again. So the military really, I think, has got to improve its acquisition. And again, we work hard. We got great people that are thinking through this, but it is a cumbersome process.
Yeah, one of the things implicit in what you just said that I want to dig into a little bit is you mentioned that hey, you think that the platforms are important, the hardware platforms are important, but the future of national security or the future of warfare is one where the software is an extremely critical component. And if you sort of look at today how the military spends its money, of 100 cents of a dollar, maybe 95 or 99 or however much of that ends up going towards hardware platforms. Do you think that has to change? Do you think that we need to, and if so, how do you think that, and how do you think we start along that journey?
Yeah, well, the fact of the matter is the platforms are there because for the military it's about power projection. So, you can't project a piece of software onto the battlefield. You've got to put a tank on the battlefield. You can't project a piece of software out into the Straits of Taiwan. You got to put an aircraft carrier or submarine or something out there. So you have to have the platform. But the platform will be enabled by, world-class software. So when we think about what the software will do for us, it is about, again, precision munitions. It is about helping the commander make better decisions. It is about connecting satellites to ground terminals, to tanks, to planes, to aircraft carriers, because the way we conduct war in the military is through what we call combined operations. In fact, it is why we were stunned that the Russians have not really used this approach, because it's what everybody in the military understands. If you're going to hit a target, the first thing you do is you send in artillery, then you have an aircraft strike, then you bring in the armor, then you bring in the troops. And all that is coordinated and is sequenced, and you understand what the battlefield looks like, and people are commanding, controlling things so that you can synchronize the effects on the target, right? And that may not only be a supply depot or a hardened target, but also when you have men on the battlefield that are maneuvering against other men, you have an eye in the sky that is helping these guys figure out where they are. Are they good guys? Are they bad guys? Tell me what we're seeing. Are there civilians on the battlefield? And that's all software and technology enabled. So we are always going to have the platforms. And the platforms, of course, are just wildly expensive. I mean, an aircraft carrier is billions of dollars, and that's before you put the 90 airplanes on it, right? So we will always need the platforms, and the amount of money that the military spends will always be weighted towards the platforms. And by platforms, not just ships, submarines, but tanks, weapon systems, small arms, weapon systems, ammunition. Having said that, I do think that while it will always be weighted that way, we will begin to spend more and more of that $1 on software, certainly on sensors and technology that enable the platform. So, for those in your world that are thinking about the military, it really is about how do we get faster at making decisions? How do we recognize the enemy? How can we kind of swarm capability to overwhelm the enemy? Because that's as old as warfare itself. It's about overwhelming the enemy with some sort of capability. Again, that requires connecting the technology dots to make sure you're putting the right amount of firepower on the right target. So there will absolutely be an increase in the amount of dollars spent certainly on software and technology rather than just platforms.
We talked about the STEM sort of graduate disparity between China and the United States. We talked about sort of how that downstream obviously has strong implications, especially to how a lot of these technologies make their way into our military enterprise. And then we talked through, I think, at a tactical level, why these technologies are so important for national security. What outside of a lot of these facts and these patterns, what are the things that make you optimistic about America?
Yeah, that's easy. I'm the biggest fan of the millennials and the Gen Z you'll ever meet. And people are always surprised by that. And I'm quick to point out, well, then you've never seen them in a firefight in Afghanistan or going to school at the University of Texas trying to make a better life for themselves and their families. I love the young people today. And I think I mentioned to Alex right before we came on, I teach a graduate class here at the University of Texas LBJ School, and I am inspired every single time I teach that class. And these are students that are, mid-20s to early 30s. They've got a little bit of life experience as they're graduate students. but they have the right values. And these generations, your generation, they have this belief that they can do anything. They're very entrepreneurial. They question authority, and I'm okay with that. They question authority when they think something isn't right. They mobilize. They mobilize on social media. They mobilize, physically to address the problem. They have this great sense of friendship and value in the people that are part of their circle. And again, that's not to say that, in my opinion, they may have a few shortfalls, but certainly no more than my generation did. And I will tell you as well, they are incredible patriots. They are just as patriotic as their parents and their grandparents before them. So whenever people begin to lose hope about the future of America, I spent some time with the youth of America. I am convinced they are going to solve the climate change problem. They are going to solve the divisiveness issues. They are going to solve all the sorts of problems that are in the world today. They may not get them all, but they're going to get a lot of them, because this is just a wonderful generation of young men and women. And I've said it before, they are going to be, they being people like you and those just above your age group, are going to be this century's greatest generation. I talked about my parents. My parents were called the greatest generation of the 20th century. Well, the millennials and the Gen Z and probably whoever comes next, this swath of young men and women, they're going to be the greatest generation of the 21st century. And that's what gives me hope.
And if you were to aim, the last question I'd have for you is if you were to aim some portion of this generation onto some of, problems or topics or areas that you think are most deserving of attention, what would those be?
That's a good, I would say education. I get back to the fact that we've got to ensure that the youth of America are properly educated. Educated in the STEM fields, educated in basic literacy and basic math. We've got to teach them civics so that we can have a civil discussion as they grow older. They have to be exposed to different cultures, different ideas, because certainly in the national security arena, if these young men and women grow up to be the national security advisor or people within the national security arena, we want them to have had the experiences, to have the intellectual tools to be able to do the job. So when we look at people that are working technology, take some of your time and mentor some of the young men and women that want to be like you. Take the time to volunteer at schools. If you're a parent with children, be engaged in the parent-teacher discussions. Because at the end of the day, if we don't raise the youth of America to be the kind of men and women we want them to be 20 years from now, that have the right values, that have the right skill set, that have the right technology and know how to use it, then it will not serve America well. So figure out a way to invest financially, personally, culturally in the education of the youth of America.
That's a great answer. Well, Admiral McRaven, thank you again, sir. It's been a great honor, and I really enjoyed this conversation, and I know that everyone at the conference did as well. So,
thank you very much, Alex. It's been great being with you. Thanks.